Greetings. Thank you for coming today. You have reached S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com. And today I'm going to be chatting with John Dunfee, who's with JMD Apologetics, and Craig Reed. Craig's not quite here right yet, but he should be here any minute. And John is here. So let's go ahead and turn it over. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm John Dunfee, of course, and I started my Apologetics channel about a year ago, mainly due to Christians not having good answers to good questions from the skeptics and people who are sincerely seeking after God, I think. And I've done a few videos on topics, and I have my one friend, Tom, who has done a bunch of good videos on, the authorship of the Gospels, and then he's done a few videos on, Old Testament genocide, slavery, and, the rape claims made in Deuteronomy 21, I think it is, where people claim that these texts support rape, slavery, and genocide and stuff like that. And a few people have liked my stuff. I have about 465 subscribers right now. I also run Christian Truth through Apologetics.com. Now I have a bunch of social media pages. I have a Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and even Tumblr. So yeah, that's what I do as of now. I'm also a college student studying biblical studies and philosophy, and then a minor in student ministry.
Well, that's nice. Now, since you mentioned the Old Testament, it seems to be one of the biggest sticking points, it seems, with atheists and skeptics and agnostics and people who are non-Christian. They a lot of times will talk about things like rape and slavery in the Bible. So, how would you respond?
Well, concerning slavery, in Tom's video, he makes the argument that word slavery is not even found in our earliest manuscripts, but it's rather servant. And man, there's a whole lot you can go into here. There's also in Exodus 21, I believe, where if you even like any idea of chattel slavery is not found in the Old Testament, because if you turn in a runaway slave, you ought to be put to death, and if you sell a man into slavery, you can also have the death penalty and stuff like that. I mean, my one video, it's only like 6 minutes long, but there's a lot better arguments that I can give, or that it gives, than I can do on top of my head right now. Actually, what I can do, I don't know if I can put links in the video or in the live chat.
Yeah, you're a moderator now, so you should be able
okay. Yeah, I'll just go ahead and put that in chat then.
Great. So I see Shane and Mike, so they said hi. So hi, Shane and Mike. It's nice that you guys came on here. And so, yeah, so that's one of the things that is a good thing to point out. And I think I just had a chat with Amadeus, and we just talked a little bit about slavery, but the idea of kidnapping a slave, basically you could be put to death. And if a slave has escaped, you were supposed to basically take care of him. So there are some things like that are specific. And then, of course, there was Onesimus and the way that Paul treated him as a brother in the New Testament, kind of opening up the door on a proper way to treat people. It would have been ideal if there were not slavery in the Old Testament or the New Testament. I guess anyone would say that, but it was just something that was very prevalent in those societies in those days, and it was a way of life. As far as a lot of people would just give themselves in, like as if they were indentured servants, and someone might say we've got slaves today when you really think about some of the different sweatshop conditions and that kind of thing that you see in other countries where people work for very minimal wages. It's almost like slavery. But I mean, it's almost like that type of slavery where it's a very, poor person going into work for a job like that.
Well, and the idea that if a slave runs away, in a sense, slaves were allowed to leave, because if you return the slave, you're to be put to death. So it's not forced, and of course you get into the whole economic system of bond servitude and so on. It's not forced slavery. If you owed people money, this is what you had to do. Now you can question, the economic system, and of course I don't think Christians would say this was the best economic system to have. No Christian would claim that. I think free enterprise economics, I think, works best, and so on. I mean, in this video I'm going to put in the description here, or in the live chat, people I think would enjoy much better.
Yeah, great, excellent. So another thing that you'd mentioned is you've been compiling some information to talk about. You've compiled some information such as minimal facts for resurrection and some of the historical standards and presuppositions and things like that. So would you like to share any of that with us?
Yeah, I started this morning. I was just thinking, I'll make a quick outline for to discuss this on SJ's podcast and so on. And it's just an outline I'm going through for the main arguments and evidence for Christianity, and then one section will be, I haven't really started on this section yet, be dealing with arguments against So I have the positive apologetics, and then you have the negative apologetics, which would be defending against claims like, are there internal contradictions in the Bible, or was Jesus a copy of pagan gods, all that stuff. I just did a podcast with IP on that as well. The answer for both of those, the contradiction one is a much better objection, I would say, because if you don't think about these things, then you can have that. Many of the things do appear to be contradictory, but good reasoning skills and logic will actually show that they're not, and hermeneutics as well. But going off that, I have two sections here. When going into the historicity of Christ, you have to have.
I see Craig. Hi, Craig. Sorry, I just want to say
Hi.
acknowledge that he's on. We see you, Craig.
Can you? Am I actually on camera, or is my James Dean? Hi, everybody.
No, you're on camera.
Oh, I am. Oh, let me kill the camera. I didn't mean to be. I have to be outside because wifey's home, so I'm walking down the street. How's this sound? Can you hear the street?
Yeah, we can hear the street. We can hear you. It's fine.
Did you see the beach?
No, I'm jealous. Actually, that's nice.
Yeah, well, I live right by Surfrider Beach in Malibu. It's actually
Wow.
it's nice. Let me see if I can get it on camera. Wow, before I kill the camera, let's see if I can film the beach. But continue. Don't mind me.
Yeah, John, go ahead and I'm sorry I didn't want to cut you off, but I saw him walking there, so I wanted to say something. So you want to go back to that a little bit, John?
Yeah, just going into history, starting presuppositions are important. Like, one would be that if you don't think we can actually look into the past and see what happened, many young Earth creationists accuse the scientists of doing this, but at the same time, their whole belief in Christ depends on inductive reasoning into the past of history as well. So now I would agree that the more you go back into the past, the harder it is to know what happened, unless you have direct fossils, which we do of certain things. But what my approach is, first, I come from a theistic worldview or presupposition, but I argue for the existence of God through arguments of natural theology, and essentially go with a cumulative case of the Kalam fine-tuning argument, moral argument, argument from desire, which is another one, free will argument, which I'm working on actually, and of course a scientific naturalist or a materialist. This is a presupposition that no matter what the historical evidence is, in their worldview, a miracle by definition cannot happen. So that's sort of where you have to debate the scientific naturalists on their presuppositions, because most of them probably aren't open to the idea of miracles because their worldview says that miracles can't happen. It's possible to. I was actually just on the Non Sequitur show, and Steve and Kyle were arguing about whether it's possible for Jesus, whether it's even possible for Jesus to rise from the dead or not. And of course, Kyle was saying no because God doesn't exist. And I was saying,
Right.
well, you have to at least admit that if it's possible for God to exist, then miracles are at least possible. If you admit God, you have to admit miracles, as C.S. Lewis would say.
Right, of course, because God is sovereign, so he could upend the laws of nature at will.
Well, I'll just say that miracles. I won't say that miracles are necessarily a suspension of the laws of nature, but rather God just implanting new things, I guess you could say, into nature, working a different way, as some people would say.
Right, rewriting it would be a way you could say it. But yeah, I mean, there's no the definition by definition, a miracle is not possible by anything you know. That's what makes it a miracle. That can't be turning water into wine. That can't happen. Obviously, that's what gives it, makes it miraculous. But go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh yeah, no problem. Well, when people say you believe in a virgin birth and so on, they want to imply that you believe that virgins by themselves can give birth and so on, and that's never a claim that Christians make. Either it's something that the skeptic who says that doesn't understand, or they deliberately misrepresent what we're saying so they can deceive people and stuff like that. But of course, I don't know what their motive is, so I can't make a positive or negative claim on that, I guess.
Yeah, it probably depends. And skeptic you're talking about. I remember when I was a kid, I thought I was so smart because I decided, you know, the same way like an atheist would. I was like, you know, a virgin birth can't happen, therefore Christianity isn't true. And I told them my new theory to my cousin, you know, virgin can't give birth. And he explained. Sorry about that. Did you guys, can you hear that?
Yeah, we can hear that.
That was pretty funny. Crossing over the Pacific Coast Highway.
No, but that's actually a good point that I think a lot of, I've heard a lot, they'll say, well, you know, Jesus can't have been raised from the dead. People just don't get raised from the dead. And so that doesn't happen. And I'm like, well, that's exactly the point. That's why we find that this is a divine occurrence. You know, you don't see someone dead for 3 days who suddenly comes to life. This just, again, in our existence, everything we know, that's completely inconsistent. So.
Right.
So there is so we're building off the presupposition that miracles can occur if there is a divine presence.
Well, exactly. When you think about all of nature that we see around us, at one point, it was just the size of a marble. And to think of that, and that nature itself had a beginning, that by definition, the beginning of nature is a miracle because the natural laws are beginning to exist. So even if you think something other than God caused the universe, or whether you think causality doesn't exist and so on, those would be miracles by definition, metaphysical beyond physics, because physics is starting at the Big Bang and so on. So if that's even possible, then it seems like miracles are easily plausible.
Just even going back to that, you know, yesterday I saw a really good presentation by Hugh Ross. And so Hugh Ross is an astrophysicist, if anyone doesn't know who he is. And I bought 4 of his books. I'm really excited about that. I already read one of his other books called Improbable Planet. But he actually, as a cosmologist, he actually looked at the conditions the Earth has had to basically, he looked at what he called habitable zones, and the Earth has had to meet 10 habitable zone conditions that relate to things such as water, ozone, and other sorts of things. The Earth is the only planet of 41 billion planets in our Milky Way galaxy that actually meets all 10 of the habitable zones to be able to produce carbon-based life. And so, so he looked at all that stuff, and it's really pretty amazing when you think about it. He also looked and compared the Milky Way to other galaxies, and the Milky Way is also sort of a Goldilocks as far as how it's structured. So it's fascinating stuff, and just thinking about it that way, and you know, if we were a little bit,
it could be argued that life itself is a miracle in process. Can you see the beach?
Wow, that is so nice. So you just walked there, Craig? You live close enough that you can walk to the beach?
I literally just walked out of my apartment. Can you see Malibu Beach Inn in the background?
Yeah, sure.
I can't tell what. I live right behind Malibu Beach Inn, right on the water. Actually, we have a beach apartment, not actually on the beach, but it's our beach. We can use it anytime.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's really nice.
This is where I live.
We're all jealous.
Really
Are you
nice,
jealous, John? I'm jealous.
It's pretty awesome.
Right.
It's my wife's idea. She had lived out here. I met her in New York, and she wanted to. She said, "Let's move out to Malibu," and I was like, "All right, fine. I'm down. Let's do it."
Oh, that's so nice.
Since 2000. Yeah, I like it.
Wow. I mean, I'm going to move closer to the beach. We're kind of far from the beach because we went into a neighborhood with good schools. So as soon as my kids get out of high school, we're bailing. We're going to St. Pete. So
cool.
Just taking advantage of the schools.
How's this sound? Should I walk to a different area? I'll go closer to the library?
You were quieter just a second ago.
Yeah, okay. So right here in the little beach parking lot, it's quiet.
Yeah,
I guess this is fine.
Good. That seems pretty good.
I can chill here for a while.
Now, John had another topic that he was going to talk about that I think that you might want to build on too, but the idea that the Gospels, some people who are skeptics claim that the Gospels were written by people who were not eyewitnesses. And so, or else they'll even say, oh, they're anonymous. So how would you argue to that particular issue?
Well, real quick, I wanted to go back to when you mentioned the planets. There's actually even stronger arguments than just the planetary fine tuning. Like, but going off of that, there are three types of galaxies: spiral, elliptical, and irregular. Let me see here. I believe we have to be in spiral galaxies.
Yeah. Hey. Yeah.
But elliptical galaxies lack heavy elements, so hydrogen and stuff like that can't exist in these, or don't have enough of that for life to be there. Then the irregular galaxies contain supernovas, so obviously life can't be there. So spiral galaxies are the only galaxies that can have the possibility of life existing. And then you get into the whole where you have to be in the spiral and so on for a planet like Earth to form. But you can just grant them. Well, perhaps Earth formed by itself without a designer or whatnot, and then go into the universal laws and so on, like the cosmological constant, which drives the expansion of the universe. That's 1 to 10 in the 90th power, so that's 1 following 90 zeros. And if that's altered by just a little, then the universe would either collapse back in on itself or not expand at all. And then there's
right.
like 40 other of these constants, and the smallest one is 1 to 10 in the 34th power. And that's, of course, 1 following 34 zeros. And you have to have all these at once, too. So you have 40 of these that have to be all in place at the same time for planets to even be possible to form, and matter to form, and the galaxies to form, and so on. So every time they attack, Earth planetary models and stuff like that, you can just go into this fine-tuning argument, which I also have an article on that on my website as well.
Yeah, I think, and I'm looking right in front of me. I bought 4 books, as I mentioned yesterday, from Hugh Ross. One of them is entitled "Why the Universe Is the Way It Is," and another one is entitled "The Creator and the Cosmos." So those are 2 of the 4 that have to do with the universe and its structure. So I'm very excited to read these because I think that I'll have a lot of additional information. Some very thick books, so we'll have some good stuff. So yeah, the fine-tuning argument is definitely.
I've never watched the debates on the fine-tuning argument. What are the general counters? What's the general line of counter argument?
Oh, I'm actually I'm actually working on an article now on that. Let's see here. One is the observational phenomenon. Basically, it's only fine-tuned because we're here to say that. If we weren't here, then we couldn't have known it's fine-tuned, or if it wasn't fine-tuned, we won't be here to observe it. And that's supposed to say, well, it has to be that way. And of course, I agree with that.
Are you talking about the counter argument? The atheists will say, like,
well, so some people will say this. It's not commonly used, but basically it goes like that. But that just begs the question of why it's fine-tuned in the first place. Like, I like Craig's analogy, where you have like 100 marksmen pointed at you, like from 20 feet away, and you're going to be executed. All the guns fire, and what's the best conclusion? This was set up to make it seem like you're going to be, a fake death or whatnot, or they purposely missed, or somehow they missed you from 20 feet away. Just because you're observing this phenomena happening doesn't mean any sort of conclusion, so you have to draw the best inference, and obviously the best inference would be that, they missed on purpose because they were trained to kill you.
That's a good. Let me give you what they say in response. I'll give you the analogy because I see this all the time, and I see the response is always coming from Douglas Adams. So I just pulled up his quote. This is how Douglas Adams.
Douglas Adams.
Yeah, he's the guy who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He's great.
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
That book is fantastic, but he's an.
Yeah, that book is funny.
And here's what he said. He said, "This is rather as if you imagine a puddle waking up one morning and thinking, this is an interesting world I find myself in, an interesting hole I find myself in. Fits me rather neatly, doesn't it? In fact, it fits me staggeringly well. Must have been made to have me in it. This is such a powerful idea that as the sun rises in the sky and the air heats up, and as gradually the puddle gets smaller and smaller, frantically hanging on to the notion that everything's going to be all right because this world was meant to have him in it, was built to have him in it, so the moment he disappears catches him rather by surprise. I think this may be something we need to be on the watch for." So that's the Douglas Adams response that I've seen lots of atheists tweet.
Yeah.
Right. It's not actually a bad response in terms of countering the idea that life was specifically designed for us, is that it just appears so because it's subjective to us, is actually a relatively decent counter argument as far as counter arguments go.
Well,
go
yeah,
ahead, Tom.
no one is saying that a hole with a puddle of water is fine too. So there's no analogous similarities. If there are, then they have to point it out. Otherwise, they're just trying to make the other side look foolish and so on. Alan Heidline, a physicist I'll be doing a podcast with, he has a channel where he dealt with this as well, just exposing the analogous reasoning and how it doesn't work as well. So I just don't think it's a good analogy, and it doesn't represent the other side. It's basically a straw man at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think if you just look at the conditions, and Hugh Ross did those yesterday, and I took pictures of a lot of his slides and started tweeting them yesterday. So if anyone goes into my timeline, you'll see some slides from Hugh Ross on some of the conditions that the world has overcome to be as we are. And they actually took a look at, because there's a statement from Star Wars that says, in a galaxy far, far away, and Hugh Ross makes the claim that it's life conditions in any galaxies we've been able to investigate so far. There's no, the galaxy itself is structured, as you kind of mentioned a little bit there, John, the galaxy itself is structured in such a way that life would not be possible. And then they even looked at life forms like carbon-based life versus other sorts of possibilities, and they've run some tests, and the way that we are is just perfect. And the other interesting thing is the conditions on the Earth right now, temperature-wise, and the fact that we're between ice ages. Humans would not have been able to survive with major global fluctuations in temperature, which they said occurred 50,000 years ago, and it'll occur again in about 50,000 years. So we're right in the middle right now at the only time when life is more survivable. He mentioned that because he said that in the when life is like right now, the global temperature change is basically about 2 degrees, and apparently before 50,000 years ago it was about 24 degrees variation. So it would be very difficult to plant crops. So people back in those days would have to plant crops, multiple types of crops, and see which one would survive, because they'd have no idea how to predict weather. So it's kind of a cool thing about, we're here at a good time, basically. So
We're here in the right time and the right place. Gee, what a coincidence. That's the thing, is like when you start to break down, there's a lot of even like potentially great arguments working on like coincidences of history and things like that, where if you know, one of the counter arguments that I've been presented with, not that often, but if there were a God, history would look a lot different. You know, that's not even close to truth. But go ahead.
that's a good, yeah, I like that. If there were a God, because then actually, if you say Jesus, just like point something out in case anyone's wondering about that. Prior to Jesus, 43% of the population lived before Jesus so far. So far in the last 2,000 years, basically 57% of the population has lived. So
I've heard other statistics on that, but I believe in general revelation, and that those who have not heard and were before Christ, just like the Jews, that how they respond to the knowledge of God they have, God will judge them based on that. But and also Molinism has a lot to say about that as well. But going off arguments for God's existence, natural theology, I think good deductive arguments like the Kalam, everything that begins to exist has a cause. You know, the universe began to exist. Now it's valid. Whether it's sound is the debate. Like I don't think most people don't challenge the validity, and if they do, then they don't understand how logic works, because I've had a class in it and so on. But deductive arguments are great because they show that you have something that is necessarily the case if the premises are true, so it can't be wrong. And then you show this using modal logic that it has to be this way in all possible worlds. And the ontological argument would go like that as well, you know, arguing about God as a grace conceivable being, and if he exists, if it's possible for him to exist, then he does exist, which seems counterintuitive, but when you get into the logic, it actually works out. But I use deductive arguments because they first off, it's very organized, and then if their objection has nothing to do with the format or soundness of your premises, then just like that puddle analogy, like that has nothing to do with Craig's fine-tuning argument, then you can just ignore it, And if their rebuttals have fallacies, or if an argument has a fallacy, then you can just ignore that as well, whether in its valid structure or whether a premise is false. So I find it was the best way to do natural theology.
Yeah, no, that's good. You know, it's funny. That reminds me. I sent a tweet out a couple of days ago that I meant to build a good logical structure in my tweet, and I forgot the punchline. And for whatever reason, every atheist it seemed on the planet jumped onto that tweet, and they wanted to point out my missing logic there. And so they started tweeting it, and then a bunch of Christians saw it. So it got like 500 likes from Christians and a whole bunch of retweets, and it didn't have the punchline, which is me. And I was like, I put all these things down, like Jesus existed, and I went down this long list and forgot to mention the part about the apostles and their bravery and that kind of thing, which was really the punchline. And so they were very quick to jump on it. Everyone.
I saw that. It got like 500 retweets. That was hilarious. I didn't realize that you left out the key details.
Yeah,
I didn't catch that.
The most important part of the argument, I skipped, and I didn't blame the atheists for all jumping on to that, pointing it out, because I blew it. But I didn't. I left it there just because it was being screen captured and retweeted. I thought it was kind of funny.
That's funny. Atheists pile on.
Well, I was in this one. Most of them probably. Well, I don't want to make a general conclusion like that. But the ones who attack me in my videos and say it's illogical to believe in God, I just first of all ask them to define logic without doing a Google search, and the Google search probably is wrong too, at least by the textbook definition. And most of them can't do it. And then I say, oh, so you're saying something is more logical, but you don't even know what logic is. One response I got called petty, and then the guy has never talked to me again. It's just like, okay, if you don't want to have an actual conversation, then that shows how logical you are and rational. But basically, logic is the body of knowledge for assessing whether an argument is valid or sound. That's all it is. And that's in
So what do you think? I got a question here in the chat that says from Stickman Sam, and he says, "What do you think?" And this will go first to John and then to Craig. What do you think is the strongest theistic argument?
Right now I think the fine tuning is probably the best, and then either the Kalam, depending on your view of time, you can use the contingency or Kalam to argue for the existence of God. I think Craig's moral argument needs working after having my discussion with Inspiring Philosophy on that, but IP has a pretty decent moral series for arguing for the existence of God with his moral argument. I'm actually sort of I haven't really seen an argument from free will, like Cold Case or God's Crime Scene has a chapter on free will, but there's no deductive argument based on it. And I've been sort of working on my own. I don't have a deductive form yet, but I sort of want to make a free will argument first before I go into a moral argument, because also you need free will to be able to do ought, and otherwise because morality presupposes that. Interesting.
So what do you think, Craig? And then we'll go back and we've got another question coming in for John after we get to Craig. So Craig, what do you think is the strongest argument?
I'll just respond to Darwin's greatest hits if.
Oh, you can see that. Okay.
Because he's asking.
That's actually a great question. My response would be twofold. The first is more important, actually. What Paul said, I come to you not with the wisdom of man, but with demonstrations of the power of God. Now, one of the reasons why I became a Christian is that God made himself real to me through the Holy Spirit. Period. No arguments necessary, no convincing. There was no intellectual processes involved. Now, that's how I think most people come to real faith, is that God demonstrates himself real to them, and they're like, oh my God, it really is God. But in terms of the actual arguments themselves, I would say the strongest is still pretty weak, but the argument from eternal truth, there's a version of it that Phaser does in his 5 proofs. Even as he presents it, it's still a pretty weak argument, logically speaking, but it's heading towards a valid, sound, logical argument that, 2 + 2 = 4. There are truths in life that are eternal, transcendent, and they have nothing to do with human beings. Human beings didn't write or create them, but yet it's sort of a variation that the universe, it's sort of a variation on presupposition, you know what I'm saying. Can you see the mountains, by the way?
Yeah,
No?
really nice.
Are they nice? I'm right by the library now. I walked away from the beach. This is Malibu for you. You walk from the beach to the mountains and, you just have a nice time. It's a variation on presuppositional that there are eternal truths built into the universe and no human mind created them. Therefore,
The
they
tag argument,
imply,
right?
right. Well, it's variation on that too. Like Matt Slick's version of it doesn't quite work. They kind of imply a creator is more, they don't prove a God. That's the problem with the proofs. They don't actually, it's not like an atheist hears the argument and goes, aha, there is a God, and walks away. It doesn't prove anything to them, but they kind of imply, morals too. It's a variation on your argument, Stephanie, about objective morals exist, therefore God exists. It's not necessarily that cut and dry, but objective morals exist, therefore it is more likely that there's a God. It's kind of like all these arguments can nudge someone towards the inclination that God is real, not necessarily prove it, case closed. That would be my answer, but go ahead.
Well, I'm going off that. Deductive arguments, if they are both sound and valid, this is why I like them. Then technically speaking, like the ontological argument would be a proof because it's based necessarily by logic. If this is full out, then just like mathematics, it's a proof by definition. Our arguments from definition, mathematics, and so on. Now, arguments from probability aren't true or aren't proofs, of course, but there are certain argument forms that are proofs. But
I get that they're true and they're logically sound. What I'm more interested in is convincing. The argument that actually convinces someone where they're like, hey, I never thought of it that way. That would be something new. That's more what I'm shooting for.
Well,
I'll tell you when I got it.
Yeah, I'll just ask them what would convince you. Now tell them, well, are you sure this is the most rational thing to believe in? It comes down to what is true and what is most rational to believe in. We're ascribing to things that are beyond our rationality, of course, because logic is not dependent on humans. Because if that's the case, we can't agree on anything. But going off that, I think logic is something that we recognize, just like how we recognize things outside of us. So I'm a realist in that sense. And when
I agree. We recognize that logic is true, and we recognize that there are such things as eternal truths. Those kind of imply that there is a God, but I can see why somebody would go, no, it don't. Go ahead.
Well, I would ask them why, and then assess whether it's not just based on whether you're convinced or not, but rather it's true. If you're talking about the lack of belief atheists, I'm not convinced, therefore you're wrong. I would ask them, okay, first off, tell me what my argument is. And then, of course, if they don't understand it, then of course they're not going to be convinced. That's sort of the first point. Now, if they get the argument right, then we go from, okay, so what's your objection? And then you have to take it by case basis, I would say.
Right, exactly. And then you say exactly what you just said. I'm not convinced. A lot of times atheists will answer with, I'm not convinced, therefore you're wrong. And that's not a valid conclusion necessarily. I'm not convinced could mean we're wrong, but I don't think we are. I think we're telling the truth. Could mean our argument isn't quite sound, or it could mean you need to do more work on your end to find out whether what I said is actually convincing and you just ain't getting it. That sort of thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, if they're just getting to the point where they're either deliberately not listening or straw manning you, then I just sort of end the conversation there because it's...
Yeah, I don't even bother with those people, with people who do that. Most of the atheists I deal with are cool and honest. And you know them. You know most of them. Steve, you said, Kyle, guys like that.
I just had a really nice talk with Amadeus. I'd recommend people follow him. He's a real nice guy.
What happened in that? I didn't get to watch it because I was fighting with my wife. I was busy fighting with my wife, so I couldn't watch it.
No, it was nice. You have to listen to it. It was he basically, we were talking about, we kind of just went back and talked a lot about the Bible in the early years of Christianity. So I think it went pretty well. He seemed to like it. He said he'll come back on, so pretty happy about that.
Cool. No, it's not an uh-oh, actually. I lost the fight, obviously. That's why I'm standing out here doing the show instead of in the apartment. Because I lost
Oh,
the
you got
fight
the
and got...
doghouse.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Craig's
Well,
in the doghouse.
no, I'm staying in the apartment and I'm doing the show in the apartment. And look where I am. No, I ain't. I'm outside. That was the fight.
That's
And
classic.
as most of my fights with my wife, I tend to lose. She's really good at fighting. That's why I don't get into very many with her. But here I am, lost the fight. Now I'm standing by the library instead of lying on the couch.
Well, that's
Go ahead.
rule number one. The wife always wins. Rule number two. See rule number one.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I very rarely get in fights with my wife, because especially my wife, because when she is on a point, like when she wants to win an argument, there's nothing you can do. It's like fighting with a pit bull tank. I don't even bother. I don't even go there. Like most of the time she's sweet, but if she's insisting that on a certain thing, I'll just lose. I don't even start.
That's funny. Hey, I got a question from Satanist Apologist. He says, how do we come to the conclusion, and I'll let you guys handle this, how do you come to the conclusion that Yahweh is the God of the cosmos? Like, how do we, obviously I'll just say real fast before I let you guys take this, but basically the Christian God, the thing is, it starts like broadly and moves in more narrow. So if you start very broad and look at the cosmology, and then it starts with proving that there is a divine power, and then we have to narrow it down as far as what characteristics that divine power would have to start the cosmos. So I'll let you guys take that.
Well, I would start from natural theology by definition. You're hearing me say this a lot, but that's because I use arguments from definitions for semantics, because that avoids who has the right definition, stuff like that. But natural theology just argues for a generic theistic God, and that's why some presuppositionalist reformers will call me an idolater, because I don't necessarily start with the God of the Bible. I start with general theism from natural theology, and then it comes down to is Judaism correct? Is Christianity true, or is Islam correct? And I'll go from there, historically speaking.
So yeah, because I think you can make a convincing case if we have a start date on the universe, and Hugh Ross made this case, but with the start date on the universe, we say, okay, 13.8 billion years ago, the universe as we currently know it now began. So before time, space, and matter. So the power that had to be in existence prior to 13.8 billion years ago had to be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial, and so and also had to be omnipotent or all powerful, because if you're going to be starting a universe, obviously this is a massive accomplishment, and it also had to be very intentional. So see, that rules out that alone, the fact that the universe has a start date rules out the idea of pantheism. It rules out the Eastern religions' beliefs. It rules out that there's a passive God and we're not guided by an active God. And in Hinduism, for example, they believe that there's a supreme being that's like a passive force that sort of goes through nature. So and also it brings in the idea of a transcendent and an immanent God, meaning he's both outside the universe and he's both within the universe. And so the immanent idea is something with pantheism. Transcendent is what would rule out Muslim Allah, because Allah is transcendent. However, he is not interacting inside the universe, according to what I've read about that. So that brings in the Christian God.
Well, you've said a lot of things there that I myself may disagree with. Using prior to the Big Bang is, of course, weird since time begins. That's why you have to say God actualizes all his decisions and so on at once, and then can create time with the choice of a personal agent simultaneously, so you can avoid that dilemma. And then also with saying God is inside and outside the universe. Before the universe exists, I would agree God is outside it in the sense that the universe doesn't exist, but I would say God becomes timeless and then exists in the universe throughout all time and so on. But I mean, those are just minor things, I guess.
No, those are good points. Thanks. What do you think, Craig?
What was the exact question again?
So we're just looking, how do you get to the Christian God from the cosmology?
From generically God in general.
Well, I just want to say something real quick. Satanist apologist, when he says the Bible says there are more than one God, this is something I have with atheists and I try and say this with as much gentleness and respect. This podcast I was on, or the non-sequitur show I was on, they got into like a 7-minute section on hermeneutics, and basically they said you can argue any position that the Bible says, and one thing they need to learn how to do, and they suck at, I say that with gentleness and respect as much as possible, is learning what a text meant to the original audience and what it could never mean. And I would suggest a book for each of them. And it's a great book. It's literally called How to Read the Bible. But the Bible does not say, just go to the chapters of Isaiah 44, I believe, where literally Isaiah says there's no God but God himself and so on. And there's many other passages refuting the apparent polytheism of the Old Testament, stuff like that. Just stuff they say about the Bible that's demonstrably false. I irritates me, and so I would suggest that for them.
What's interesting is, it's the understanding of what the Trinity means. And so if you go back to what's interesting is in the book of Genesis, even God is referred to as Elohim, which is a plural word. So already we're seeing a Trinity mention, or the idea that there's a plurality in the Trinity.
You're talking about Genesis 1:27, I'm pretty sure. And one of my professors actually argues that that's talking about the characteristics of God when you go into the Hebrew and stuff like that.
Okay, that seems fair. So what do you think? Here's another question that I've seen before related to God and the Bible, and I have my answer, but I want to see what you guys would say to this. Is there's certain verses in the Bible that say no one has seen God, and then there are other verses in the Bible where we see examples of God being seen. And so I just wrote a blog on this, but I want to see if you guys, my idea is when the part where God is seen, and I watched Pastor Mike Winger's video on this, which is fantastic, by the way. But the parts where God has manifested, you can make an argument, and they always say the angel of the Lord appeared. And I think you can make a pretty good argument that in those cases, the angel of the Lord is Jesus.
Well, and then you have the Spirit of God, which some people try to argue is the Holy Spirit. I would say that the concept of the Trinity can be found implicitly in the Old Testament, but not explicitly, because this idea of the Trinity would confuse the Jews who are struggling with polytheism. They would have seen God as polytheistic instead of one being in three persons. I think this doctrine would have affected their trying to get God, or trying to get their beliefs back into strict monotheism and so on.
Yeah, that's fair.
Which one do you want me to answer first? I still haven't. Should I do
whichever one you're in the mood for?
Generally speaking, satanic apologist is fairly reasonable. I don't know if he, but as a whole, he can be talked to and have a normal conversation with him. I don't know if he was who you.
Sorry if I misrepresent or anything like that. Just
Oh no, it's not a problem. He watches a lot of our shows, and I got into a tiff with him when I first met him, but he's been cool ever since. So I just wanted to clarify that for his benefit. I would say before I became a Christian, I had an intellectual conviction that God was real based on, I was kind of into New Age stuff. I was kind of into like Taoism, and I was looking for God through my mind, reading books and reading like, there was a lot of stuff convincing me, like the fact that there are archetypes. I don't know if you ever read The Power of Myth, Joseph Campbell and Jung, but the fact that there seems to be evidence for some sort of cosmic consciousness, that there are things that reappear in human mythology time and time again that we keep referring back to, that seem to indicate the supernatural to some degree, or hidden psychological depth. So that was starting to convince me intellectually that there was a God. So if you said, do you believe in God, when I was like 28, I would have said yes. How I got to the Christian God, like we were saying at the beginning, isn't necessarily plausible. It's not supposed to be. You're supposed to believe right at the outset in the supernatural and the impossible. How it happened with me is the Holy Spirit himself revealed that, Jesus was who he said he was on a specific night. Made that real to me in my heart, said like, look, convicted my heart. That's how most Christians, there are people who are raised Christian. That's one of the things that atheists will say all the time, If you weren't raised Christian, you wouldn't be Christian. I wasn't raised Christian. I kind of was, but not really. For me, it was personal revelation. I believe, honest to God, that God himself said, look, I'm real. You know, I am who I say I am. So it would be totally different. Like, intellectually speaking, I would have guessed something other than, by rational analysis, I would have guessed something like Star Wars. You know, that there's like a life force or something, that if you're a loving person, the life force, you know what I'm saying, like a watered down Eastern type of, those themes seem to be more intellectually, but from the actual experience of living my life, God himself. That's why. That's what I would answer. Go ahead.
That's exactly how I came to God too. But I know that not everyone does come in that way. But I actually, let me go back and rephrase that. I look at people like J. Warner Wallace, who was born an atheist and who started doing a lot of investigating on the life of Jesus and looking at it from a forensic detective sort of way. And he thought that the evidence itself was very strong and built a case for the divinity of Jesus. And then you have someone like Lee Strobel, who was an investigative reporter for a Chicago newspaper, and he also started investigating and came to that same conclusion. Now, I would say that God opened their eyes in both of those cases.
Right. I would say that too, definitely. You could definitely make an intellectual case. I was just saying, for me, it wasn't intellectual. It was
for
nothing
me,
to do with
that's how I've came to it. And now, but people don't want to believe you when you say that. So I came to it exactly how you did. It was not an intellectual case. God made himself extremely obvious to me a few times, and so then I got so excited about it. I tell people, and no one believed me. So they're like, "Yeah, that's your story." So I'm like, "Okay, well, maybe I'll have to build a case using apologetics because I can't."
And then you met the atheists, and they're like, "Then you met the atheists, and they're like, prove it. You have any evidence? Prove it. You have any evidence?" And you're like, "Oh, Brad, start over. Start from scratch."
They say your arguments aren't convincing. Well, that's actually, they say your arguments didn't convince you, and I'm like, well, I think they're good arguments, but no, that's not exactly how I was convinced. I was convinced because God made himself obvious.
Right. That's exactly how most people who come to like a real tangible faith. The challenging parts are like, well, I want to start getting involved with the epistemologists because they challenge even that. So that's it. That's an interesting. I want to start getting some of them on my channel, you know, because I've seen how they do the, you know, the questions they ask are perfectly reasonable. If you were a Hindu, why, you know, don't you think you would have met Shiva? And I'm like, yeah, probably, but I'm not a Hindu, so I can't really put myself in that. You know, it didn't happen that way.
Have you seen those shows? Like they'll drive around Anthony Magnabosco and that whole group of people where they ride around on their bikes with the cameras and they film people while they're epistemologists?
I chatted with him a little bit. Hopefully I'll get him on my show. Drew knows him, and so does the guy I had on my channel 2 weeks ago, Dan, Objectively Dan, was working with him before he became a full atheist. He met him. He did one of those things where he met him at the street corner and said, you know, well, how did you come to that belief? And those series of questions, and he became an atheist. Not necessarily because of that, but that was a big part of transforming him from nice Christian young man into, you know, fire-breathing, eating baby atheist.
So what would you say to that, John?
Well, I'm actually curious, what were your guys' experience and stuff? You know, if it's not evidentialism or whatnot, then what experiences have you had that showed to you that God revealed to you and so on? I'm actually curious about that.
I'll just tell you, I had a vision once of Jesus. I had a dream once where Jesus basically was in a room, and I also have heard him audibly. Now that people are going to think I'm crazy when I say that, but that happened in 2016. I was at a conference. I was in a hotel room, and I was thinking about my life and thinking about things like that, and suddenly I could hear an audible voice. And in both cases, in the dream and in that time, he basically scolded me. I didn't like what I was thinking about or what I was doing. And
you better become a Christian. You better get a Christian to apologetics. You're in trouble, girl.
That's what he did. Because in both times, he basically told me, what you're doing is wrong. I need you to change this about yourself. And I don't like to go into too many details on but that's how I know that someone said, well, how do you know that was Jesus? And I'm like, because he gave me me instructions on how to live a better life. And if it were some, demonic presence or something like that, I certainly wouldn't be instructed on what to do about my life that can make me a better Christian.
Right. He would have said, go kill like the busboy or something. If it was an evil voice, it would have said like, kill somebody.
Yeah, it was
Right.
a voice of reason. It's funny, I hear songs, they're called the voice of reason, and that's exactly how I would describe it.
Let me just say one thing in favor of word of knowledge. They call it as a gift of the Spirit. And prior to me becoming a Christian, I had something that could be considered a word of knowledge. I was on a subway coming back from New York City, and I was dealing with this. I was an actor at the time, and I was involved in Circle in the Square, and there was this really, really intense kind of cult-like figure that I was in his class. He did there was one famous guy from his class who just had a heroin overdose. I forget. He's an actor, a really good excellent actor. Just died of a heroin overdose like 3 years ago. I can't remember his name. But I was in this guy's class, and I was on the subway coming back from Manhattan, and I felt, it wasn't an audible voice, but I felt a word in my spirit saying, hard to explain what that means exactly, saying, you shall know them by their fruits. I was like, know them by their fruits? I didn't even read the Bible at that point. Like, what is that supposed to mean? And then I started thinking about the guy and how he's kind of psychologically damaging the people in his class. And I felt very strongly, I didn't necessarily go, that was God telling me to get out of that class, but I got out of the class. I was like, wow, that's hardcore. So I don't know if you would qualify that as a supernatural experience, or a lot of atheists have had experiences like that. They just discount them as having any basis in reality. If you want, yeah, they might not be technically be rational, but you disregard a voice like that at your peril. I was going to take that seriously, and I left the class, never looked back. And the most famous person from that class died of a heroin overdose. So that tells you everything you need to know right there. Don't regret that decision.
That's actually, you built a good point, because I've talked to atheists 2 times on channels where they've told me that they had an experience, actually 3 now that I think about it. I was just talking to a woman a couple of weeks ago, and she said that she was driving down the highway and she had this major experience that said, don't, I think it was get off the highway or something like that. And she basically saved her life from that.
Right.
Something happened. And then there was Peter I've spoken with, and her name was Wendy. She's wonderful. Peter I've spoken with, and he thought that aliens abducted him.
I'll be back real quick. I have to use the bathroom.
Okay. And then Steve, Craig, you and I were on with Steve. No, actually it was on your channel when Steve said he had that experience with the Ouija board. I mean, these guys have had these experiences.
I can understand why. I can understand in some of them why they would discount the experience or say, obviously, Steve isn't going to go, I now believe in demons. But with my experience, okay, for me, yeah, it might have been superstitious, but I took that word seriously. And I checked it with my wife. I was like, I kind of felt like, I don't know, I got this sense like, don't go back there. It's kind of cult-like. And I gave her some more details, and she said, yeah, get out. Get out of that class, So it depends. It really depends on if you hear a voice that you think is potentially supernatural, you do got to do normal checks, like a normal human being. Run it by people you trust and say, what do you think this means? Like if you had a dream that weirded you out, right? That you thought was kind of prophetic. You wouldn't just go, okay, now I'm going to go live in the woods and build bombs. Or you'd be crazy. You'd go like, you'd run it by your friends and say, I had this dream, and then it resonates with some of the people that you trust, Like,
well, that's exactly it. And so those aren't my only experiences. Those are just, and I have had a really negative experience, but I won't get into that so much. But I think that you have to, I mean, I had a dream in college that this one girl who was sitting in accounting class, I'd never met her. She was sitting like 4 rows ahead of me, and she was noticeable. Like, she was a very attractive girl. And I remember having this dream that she was going to be my college roommate at a different school. And so, like 2 days later, I'm walking out of the class next to her, and she said, hey, I'm transferring up to Florida State. We were both sophomores, and it was the middle of our sophomore year. She said, hey, I'm transferring up to Florida State. And I said, and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But I had told my sister, I told everybody in my family, I had a dream that this one girl was going to be my roommate, and she was my roommate. It was, right. I mean, it's a little bit self-fulfilling, but what are the chances that this woman I'd never even met was going to be transferring second semester of her sophomore year to Florida State. It was kind of weird.
Well, okay, so how I would say this to an atheist, though, and present this is, yes, sometimes these things are not real, and you have to check them with, you know, reality. You run it by people you trust. It's kind of an offshoot of intuition. Prior to me becoming a Christian, I was really, really, really reliant on intuition, you know. And my wife, for example, part of the reason why I trust her so much with some things is she's scarily intuitive. She'll get a read on somebody and she'll know things about them the first meeting, and she'll be 100% right. She did it with my mom. She's the only person who read my mom because she was just so intuitive. She's got like a radar for how people are actually wired. She can pick it up in the atmosphere. So that's sort of supernatural. It's based on natural cognitive processes, you know, sensitivity, intelligence, yada, yada, yada. But it's if there is a supernatural being, you know, they think we're crazy, I guess. But if we're right, you know, that voice is actually how God works through people. Same idea as like artistic talent, same way. You know, it's coming. You're sensitive to something that other people are disregarding or shutting down. Same idea. That's how I'd say. Go ahead.
I'm back, by the way.
John, have you had any spiritual experiences?
Nothing like an audible voice or what you guys were talking about. For me, the greatest experience or revelation is knowing that Christianity is true based on, you know, I think Romans makes clear that we all have sufficient knowledge of God through, you know, creation and so on. Not in the presuppositionalist sense, but it's self-evident that God exists, and to deny otherwise would be going against the general sense of, you know, God existing and stuff like that.
Yeah, you're also in college, so you've got a lot of years ahead of you. Now, Craig is older like I am, so it's like...
Yeah, don't tell.
Yeah, I won't say how old you are. You didn't say how old I am either, so we're old. But I mean, it could be... I didn't have some of these experiences till I was in my 40s, so...
True, but
yeah,
I'm a Christian for these experiences as well, because I think God has made clear... because to test the spirit, you have to test the spirits. Pretty sure that's in, is that in Romans 14 or
1 John, I believe.
Yeah, 1 John. You have to
test.
Yeah, so you have to start.
Make sure it is of God.
You have to start with the word to know whether something is revelation from God. You have to, if it like how you were talking about whether it's demonic possession. Like obviously, if you heard an audible voice to go kill people, obviously that won't be.
You would question it.
Yeah.
You would at least question it, I hope, and you wouldn't just start, hey, it's got to be God.
and when you take the Bible at that approach, then you have to ask the question, well, how do I know the Bible is authority on these things? And that's where I sort of go with my cumulative case apologetics and stuff like that.
Well, let's. I want to point out something to someone who's in the chat here, real quick. Dead Commies Lal. I know this person. I actually don't even know if Dead Commies Lal is male or female. I don't know if she or he wants to let me know. But Dead Commies is someone who was an atheist, and she just said something on Twitter that she was reading the Bible, and it was almost like God opened up her eyes. She or he.
I've had that experience where it usually happens if I'm in prayer. And that's how I actually read the Bible. I look for God to speak to me through it, and I go into prayer, and then I don't really act on what I read until I feel that connection to it. I don't know if that made any sense, but I've had that experience. I understand that. There's a lot of times where I'll read a passage, and then I'll be in prayer, and I'll read the same thing, and it just totally comes alive. And I'm like, aha. I now get that. I didn't before. But go ahead, John, you go.
I'll say a prayer and I'll open the Bible, and a lot of times I'll happen on a similar verse. And for some reason lately I keep opening it up to Luke 24. I have no idea why Luke 24. I've looked it over again and again. It's got the road to Emmaus on it. It's got some things like that. I don't know why that keeps popping up, but it's like I feel like God is kind of sending me a message. So.
Well, I've had that experience a lot where I feel like God is, there's one particular scripture will just come alive for me, and I'll be like, aha, I think I know exactly what that means and exactly what God is trying to tell me to do in that particular situation. That happens a lot. You know, I can understand. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I have had experiences like that, just nothing like a dream or audible voices like SJ has had.
Yeah, well, those experiences are, certain people are wired differently. They're probably more likely to have them. It's just how people actually, atheists are probably wired differently. That's why they're so, analytical and scientific. A lot of them. So they'd be wired to discount experiences like that, or not be inclined to really go with experiences like that.
Oh, that
But
reminds me of
those-
another atheist. Let me tell you that other atheist that I talked to. Well, he's not an atheist; he's a deist. He calls himself Brass Wisdom. He is hilarious because he told me that he kept opening up. I mean, for some reason, the number 316 kept appearing to him. Everywhere he went, he was noticing the number 316. And then his Bible, like, kept opening up. It would fall and open up to John 316, like over and over and over. And I'm like, well, that seems like a clear sign. He's like, yeah, it's interesting. And,
Yeah, I remember hearing that. I was like, what? I would, even if it were superstitious, I would never go against something like that. Unless obviously it was the same thing. It was a voice telling me to kill people. I probably wouldn't kill them, but probably would not. John, you were going to say?
Well, ultimately, authority comes from what the Bible says, because, well, whether you think it's true or not, I think it comes down to that, essentially, for determining whether something is revelation or not. And I actually agree with John Locke as well, that if revelation contradicts reason, then you have God contradicting himself in that, saying something logically absurd.
Right. That's why you should check, because it could also be your own mind and not necessarily God. So you got to be careful of things that you want to be true. That's a mistake I saw people making in church all the time, like lay Christians. Oh, is God telling me to do this? And I'd be like, no, it wasn't. That's just what you want to do. No, it wasn't. It wasn't even close. Oh, I opened to the Bible and God told me to leave my husband. Sure, he did.
yeah,
sure.
exactly. That's that.
I believe you. Yeah, it sounds like God. But yeah, you got to check it with. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say I've always been a Christian, but at the same time, I've never. It was sort of just while I was raised that way type deal. Even though that won't say whether Christianity is true or false or not, but aside from that, I wanted to know whether Christianity is true or not, so that's why I got into apologetics. And I found apologetics, typically the other side gets represented pretty well, because when I ask atheists, do you believe this, and they typically say yes, and I learned most of their arguments from apologetics, so they represent the other side pretty well. And
the atheists represent the Christian apologetics pretty decently. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that the apologetics. Yeah.
Okay.
I find people like Steve represent what I believe very well, because he's familiar with the philosophy. And people like Kyle need to read up on that in order to understand classical natural theology and classical apologetics and stuff like that. But I just found apologetics very helpful. And I'm a Christian because Christianity is true. I mean,
right. You dug into there's definitely the case for digging into the intellectual and the philosophical aspects of Christianity and strengthening your faith through, philosophy, logic, reason, all that type of thing. Definitely. Absolutely helps a lot. I believe that's what you just said, but is that what you said?
Sort of. Well, what do you think philosophy is?
Well, as we're using it in this conversation colloquially, we're talking about, philosophical underpinnings of Christianity. Like, that would be like Thomism or...
I'm not just talking about that when I'm talking about philosophy. What I mean half the time is, like, logic is also a component of it, but for any coherent statement, you need logic, whether intellectual or not. Like, a simple statement, I went to the store because of this or that. I mean, you have a premise and a conclusion and so on in that. But aside from that, again, philosophy is the love of wisdom, and if we think God, the beginning of knowledge is, the fear of God or whatnot, however you want to put that. I mean, philosophy, if you read Proverbs and, love the Lord with all your mind, I think philosophy should be a part of every Christian's life.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
have to say, you mentioned IP a couple times. His name is Inspiring Philosophy, and I think I've listened to a bunch of his videos. He's very good at that. He's very good at explaining his positions and using a nice philosophical approach.
Yeah, he's the only Christian I've ever seen debate Matt Dillahunty and come out at least a little on top. He's the only one who I haven't walked away like, oh my God, he just got killed.
Well, what about Jordan Peterson? You didn't think he did a good job?
That was Jordan Peter. I think Jordan Peterson is always. Did you see his Sam Harris debate yet on Vancouver? It's way better. It's 100 times better, Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson got thrown off of his Jordan Peterson thing a little bit with Matt Dillon. He's a little intimidated by him, believe it or not, because he doesn't really know the atheist Matt Dillahunty. I know Matt Dillahunty's thing really well. I've watched almost every video that he's done. So I know where he's going half the time he opens his mouth. Jordan Peterson kind of was a little bit defensive, and he kind of used some lame apologetics on him where he's like, you're not really an atheist. You know, that wasn't Jordan Peterson.
I don't think that's what Jordan Peterson was saying when people say that he was saying that you're not really an atheist like Saitan Brudenkate and people like that do. I think he was more saying that the idea of philosophical atheism is bankrupt and no one really lives consistency in a
right. Yes, part of his whole thing, which I think is a great argument or the beginning of a great argument, is that Judeo-Christian ethics suffuse everything in Western civilization. So someone like Matt Dillahunty and Sam Harris were raised on it, and it's informing their opinions and their ideas. But he didn't say that in the debate, or he didn't present that well. He kind of said it like a Saitan Brudenkate, you know. It sounded more like him. I agree. I know what you're saying, and I agree with you. I just don't think Jordan Peterson was at his A game. Watch the Sam Harris Vancouver debate.
I did see the
Sam Harris. That one.
Because he was talking about morality. Because Sam Harris, the hard thing with Sam Harris is he has this whole thing on objective morality. He agrees that we have objective morality, but then he wants to say that, and we all want to be subjective. We all want subjective well-being. So he tries to be a consequentialist and use that approach. And it's like, but then he points out his own contradictions. What might maximize one person's, and he defines well-being as like happiness and that kind of thing. And so what maximizes one person's happiness could really hurt another person. So on an individual level, it could be a problem. His particular assessment of how, because he's trying to say that's the objective point from which we all make our moral decisions.
The reason why I like his take on morality is that it's useful. Not that I think it's 100% correct. It's that it's useful for atheists to start from a place of, we agree that morality is objective somehow. Because then you can have a real, it's like with your debate with Carrier. Carrier is sort of Sam Harris meets Kant. You know, I agree with Sam Harris's take, more or less, 80% of it or something. But it's a useful first starting point, so you don't have to get bogged down in a more or less bullcrap. You know, morality is subjective. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. That's just me.
There's somebody, I'm forgetting his name right now, but there's somebody who wants to debate me. I have to go back and look at my Twitter account. Somebody wants to debate me who wants to be, he's a relativist. And I thought, well, that's going to be fun. I could kill that one. That makes it much easier for me to debate somebody who's a relativist than someone who's an objective agreeer.
Yeah, smoke that fool. Go ahead, John.
Well, when debating objective morality, it's hard to pin a truth value on a moral statement. I mean, you can have moral facts, of course, like but they have to be counterfactuals and stuff like that. Like, I like Steve McRae's example. If you don't want to burn your hand, then you ought to move your hand away from the fire or whatnot.
Right.
And those are true. The only real moral statement that could have a truth value would be, a lie, but the ought part, whether you ought to lie, it's hard to point down. So moral realists typically argue from intuition when it comes to that. And I would actually take the presuppositional approach concerning the epistemology of, well, if you're denying intuition, then how do you know your senses are reliable and stuff like that? And, well, you sort of have to assume that. And if you're starting to assume things, then why not just assume morality is objective, since it really is like that?
I just realized Skylar Fiction. That's the person. Skylar Fiction. The one he's the one who had that The guy, the 21-year-old or 23-year-old Matt on his channel.
Yeah, he's decent. He's pretty cool. He seemed pretty cool to me. I don't know him that well, but he's a what?
He's a deist. But I always say I'm an atheist towards your God, but it's just like, okay, however you want to put that.
Really? I didn't know that. There you go.
He's a deist? Is that what you just said?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he is.
Okay, I didn't know that either.
I thought he was an atheist.
Relativist, I'm pretty sure. But he actually debated Satan and Kate on the Non-Sequitur show. And he complains about everything in the Old Testament, but then out the other side of what he says, it's, everything is subjective, essentially. But yeah, he wants to hold that what God apparently did with how he reads certain passages and so on. That God is evil and so on, but at the same time, evil doesn't exist on his view. And I think Peterson makes a good point with that on this worldview of atheism. It really is bankrupt philosophically because you can't draw concise conclusions of morality and stuff like that. And Nietzsche, who GPH brought up, I think he was the most philosophically consistent atheist and lived. He eventually went insane from being consistent, I think. And I'm not trying to pin this on atheists or whatnot. I hope they're not consistent, but because I do, and some will get mad at me, but I think if you're truly consistent, meaning has to be subjective, and essentially if it's subjective just like morality, then how can you say that it's essentially not nihilistic in the sense of
right? That was the whole part of his whole point, was like God is dead, but that's not necessarily a good thing. That 100 years down the line, that's going to produce nihilism in the society. And he was more or less correct. His analysis, it wasn't, people think God is dead is like, they think of it as like a battle cry, and it was more of despairing. God is dead and society's in trouble because of that fact. And Peterson builds on that a lot. That's what I like about Peterson. He's a big fan of Nietzsche, he's a big fan of Jung, and he's bringing a lot more to the table than your standard apologist.
That's what I like about him too. He's very good with history and like Dostoevsky and all of those different authors from the past. Peterson's excellent on that, and I've heard him on Nietzsche, and he's right. Look what happened with Stalin and communism just following Nietzsche. Right.
I'm sure the atheists got a whole. They'll go crazy hearing that. Yeah, but yes, there's a whole good argument to be made about all of that Peterson is definitely on point with. He was much better in the Sam Harris debate. John, you were going to say? I cut you off, sorry.
I want to consider Jordan Peterson a Christian apologist, I guess. He defends certain things that...
No, he's more defending religion. Yeah. The guy who's coming on, I got Adam Friended coming on Monday, and he's actually got some really good points on the subject, because he's an atheist, but he's pro-theist. I'm going to find out exactly what that means, but he sees the pro-social benefits of religion. So does Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson is kind of coming to Christianity because he sees like the pro-social benefits of religion. He's kind of coming backwards. He didn't start out a Christian and go, now I'll defend, religion. He started seeing that religion is really valuable and useful, and he's kind of going, how could it be so valuable and useful if there's no God? So he's kind of coming to faith that way. That's how I see it. But
I like that.
What do you guys think?
Have you heard, who I love listening to too, and I just listened to him again this morning, is Stefan Molyneux. Are you guys familiar with him?
I know.
I'm pretty sure, is he still an atheist? I know he's conservative, but
yeah, he's an atheist, and somebody said I should call into his channel. Now I am not calling into Stefan Molyneux's channel. It's like,
do it.
No way, I'm not doing that again.
But just smoke that fool. Just smoke that fool.
Yeah, you don't know this guy. He's
a younger.
I listen to all his stuff. I like listening to him because he is an expert on some, like, for example, I saw some really good stuff on him from about Karl Marx. So I really like what he says about that kind of stuff. And I even like some of his political points and things like that. And he takes a right view, which I don't. So I like to listen to that view and understand it. But I listened to his arguments against God, and they just were completely inconsistent. And so, but it would be hard to argue with this person on his channel when he's written a book on telling arguments or writing arguments.
Right, right.
So
Yeah, no, he's
he's
definitely,
written a
he's
book on
definitely.
debating. I mean, he'll probably blow me away, and then I would be a big, terrible, why do it? So
Oh,
But he, I,
are you more
got,
towards the left, SJ? In
yeah, I'm
certain
more towards the
politics?
left on most
yeah, she
things.
is. She's kind of a hippie. Right.
I'm on the right as far as abortion. Like I actually
Yeah.
I prefer. I mean, I would say I advocate pro-life positions and that, but I'm on the left, like on the environment, education, all these other kind of things.
Well,
Immigration, like I'm actually on the left there for sure.
what about the right? There's a motorcycle in the background. What about the right on education? Would you disagree with?
Well, like my governor, Rick Scott, basically cut off all kinds of educational funding to the grade schools. So now they've just kicked up our taxes quite a bit because his decision to change the budget around and give less money to the schools than they can possibly even get by on. And so I just say it just seems like they're always making cuts on education, and I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah, politics. That's sort of my secondary thing. I'm more towards. I do think we need less government, but I'm not
Oh, cool.
libertarian. So,
But you're a small government conservative. Is that?
Yeah,
Is that
and
the deal?
I'm pretty sure you two debate each other on gun rights and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's another thing. I don't like guns at all. There's no guns in my house, as far as I know. My husband is on the right though. It's like,
Dude,
I
Oh,
told
is
him
he
if you
really?
ever
Awesome.
have a gun in our house, never let me
Awesome.
see. Yeah,
dude,
well, it's funny because he loves watching. Like he likes Trump, and so we'll sit and watch. Like he'll
well,
put the
I
phone.
will say I'm not a fan of Trump because of some things he said concerning, like when he said Kim Jong Il is, a good leader. I thought that was sort of disgusting. But generally speaking, he's
I,
not as bad as people say he is.
That reminds me of something very funny, though. So my husband likes watching Fox News, and so the other night, and I barely ever pay attention to when that's on. I usually have my computer going or I'm doing something else. But so he puts this Fox News on, and it was the funniest thing I ever saw. Michael Avenatti, who's the lawyer for who's the lawyer for that what's her name? Shoot, I'm forgetting her name. Michael Avenatti is the lawyer for the porn star who had an affair with Trump, and so so Michael Avenatti was on there with Shepard Smith. Was it Shepard Smith? No, it was oh, I can't remember the other guy's name. It was one of the Fox hosts, and they kept putting creepy porn lawyer and stuff in the Fox thing. I'm like, why would they do that? That was just so bad. You don't do that as professional news organization. So anyway, I got a kick out of it watching that debate because I would never want to debate either of them.
Well, I have a question. Do you have children?
Yeah.
Like, how old are they?
I have two sons. One's 13 and one's 12.
So I'm curious. This is something I find a bit disturbing on the left. Not maybe you particularly, but how would you, if something were to happen, how would you defend your family or your husband, or how would you have home defense and stuff like that?
Well, I just don't think it's a. I mean, I guess that's the argument that my husband would actually make is we need to have guns because if something would happen. I'm just going to make the assumption that I happen to live in a neighborhood that's 1/3 military and everyone has guns around here, and so I hope I could just go have them protect me because they know how to use the guns too.
Well, when in the middle of the night when you're sleeping, someone could break in and how would they get there in time? Well, and of course you have the church shooting in Texas. I mean, man, if that one military man didn't get there, or the guy who had the AR-15, then more people have probably been killed. I mean, there's an example of where I think allowing people, the right people to own weapons, can save many people's lives and so on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess if the
Sorry, I
right.
just cut out.
I mean, it's one of those things that some people feel it's a natural right in the United States, and it's a tough debate. I'm just realizing it's Tucker Carlson. That's the one who debated Michael Avenatti. You guys have to watch that.
I saw that. I saw that. I watch him almost every night. He's actually one of the smartest guys on the right. I like his show.
It was so. I mean, I almost fell off my chair. I was laughing so hard watching it because both of them. Tucker Carlson is a tough. I mean, he's very tough to debate, and Avenatti got in there, and it was just really amusing to watch.
Well, he was kind of a psycho. He was like, You wouldn't have a. I'm surprised you have a show. You're so ignorant. It was like, it was pretty crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was
I'm
interesting. Well, so should we tie it up, guys? Do you want to make some
I was just
final
saying my
parting
phone is
shots?
running out of. My phone is running out of juice. So yeah, can you see where I am now?
Yeah, you live in a nice place.
we didn't even
Yeah,
get into
I
the
was also.
historicity or stuff like that. I sort of went off topic before.
Oh, that's no problem. This was fun. You come back, we'll do it again.
Yeah, we'll do it
Right,
again.
Steph? I'm
Yeah.
inviting you to Stephanie's channel. Come back.
No, we should.
It was fun.
Let's plan another. We'll plan another time. We'll get together again and maybe try to make this more regular.
Yeah, and add add one or two people.
Sure. Yeah. If anyone wants to come on, let us know. So, does that sound good, John? You good with that?
Yeah, just I would like to know who it is beforehand.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
we'll run all screenings.
Yeah.
We'll chat with you on that. So, well, good. Well, thank you everybody for coming in here. And you guys want to mention where we can find you again, just in case someone's just tuning in now.
Well, you can find me at. Oh, go ahead, Craig. You can go first.
Craig Reed at the Christian Response is my channel. Stephanie will post a link, right? She'll post a link to it.
Oh, good idea. Yeah, I'll
And-
post links to both of your channels.
Go ahead, John.
And you can find me at JMD Apologetics 101 or at actually I'll put my website in the live chat at ChristianTruthThroughApologetics.com.
Excellent. And both of you guys can be found on Twitter. You're at Craig Reed Holy, HOLY, and it's a Twitter handle for John is JMD Apologetics. So everyone look them up, find them, and that's wonderful. And I see John's got his link. So thank you guys. Thank you everyone for coming in here and listening to us. We'll be doing it again.
Cool. Good stuff, guys. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.